All right, and we are live. I'm excited to be back. It's been a week to, I think, 2 weeks at this point since we've done a real guest interview. So I'm super excited to be back for another one of these. Today I have my guy Connor Barber here with me. Connor, what's going on?
How you doing, Tommy?
Good, good. I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and share some of your knowledge. I've been looking through some of your stuff and doing some research, and I know I'm going to learn a ton today. And whenever I learn a ton in the podcast episodes, it's always a good one. So I'm super excited to have you on.
Oh, I really appreciate you having me on. And, I just tell everyone, and this is something that, I kind of keep in mind for myself is, there's always something that we can learn. There's always a way we can kind of broaden that lens, broaden that horizon in terms of what we understand about, the body, basketball, and just, everything in between. So, always looking for always being in that state of mind of never stop learning. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Definitely agree with you there. And now, as we're getting into, before we dive into the science and the training stuff and all that great stuff, give us an idea of kind of who you are, what you do exactly, and how you got into what you're doing currently.
Yeah. So I got my degree actually in chemical engineering at Ohio State University. While I was getting my degree there, I was also doing some training on the side for a number of years. Was always a big athlete in high school. Play a little bit of club in college, club basketball in college. Cool. And so I was always staying active and whatnot. I think we kind of took the turn in terms of really wanting to take things to another level is, just always, when I was playing basketball, I wasn't the most skilled guy in the court. I wasn't the best guy in the court, but, yeah. And it's like, how do I optimize my body? How do I optimize, my movements to be better? Because obviously I'm not doing things right if I'm not, at the level where I want to be.
Yeah.
And so that was, always just something in the back of my mind. And having a brother who's an athletic trainer and then a sister-in-law who's a physical therapist, I'm always kind of in that realm in terms of, learning about the body, being around situations where, they talk about certain things, with, whether it be just general population or athletes. And then, fast forward a few years, I get the opportunity to work at an amazing facility in Miami, DVC Fitness. I learned from perhaps one of the most brilliant minds in the business, Donnie Raymond. And actually how we kind of got connected was honestly going back to my engineering background. So he was a engineer in the Navy SEALs, and then me having that engineering background, we kind of clicked, in terms of how we, how we approach looking at the body. Honestly, I don't see muscles. I don't, I mean, obviously the muscles and tendons and everything's are there, but the way I view it is probably completely different than most people do. I view it as a system of levers and pulleys, simple machines, force vectors, everything in between when it comes to those, math and physics side of it. And so then it's, I look at it from that viewpoint first, and then I start to add in, all right, this is what's causing, those forces. This is why we're getting that sort of reaction, and so on and so forth. So, so fast forward, I worked there for a couple of years, and now I'm working at a facility called Rise Athletics in Columbus, Ohio. So that's where I am today.
Awesome. And I'm really interested to dive into your approach to training, like you said, more driven by like the math side of it, the physics side of it. I think it's a really interesting approach. What do you think kind of led to that? Do you think it was your engineering background that kind of fed into that, along with your work at DVC, or what do you think led to developing that approach?
Yeah, so I always had a love for science and math. Always just came naturally to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, going to college, I knew I wanted to do something math and science related. And I had no idea how to even apply that to the human body. I actually toyed with the idea of going into athletic training before I got into college. And honestly, my first year of college, I was like, maybe I should change degrees. I don't know.
That chemical engineering major is no joke.
It's not. It was pretty tough. I'm not gonna lie. It's there's some really intense physics and chemistry out there. I was taking classes in thermodynamics, quantum physics, and calculus 3 and everything beyond, a little bit of differential equations. So, as far as learning to apply the physics and math, it kind of just came naturally to me because I already enjoyed the math and the physics side so much. And honestly, when we look at the human body, it's just like looking at a force diagram in physics. You have your body of mass, all right, and then you have the surrounding forces, all right. So if someone's a basketball player is looking to make a jump for a dunk, what forces lead him to reach that height, and so on and so forth. Or if a guy's performing, kind of a jab or into a step back, what forces are going on. And so that's the first thing I think about before I even get into the body itself. I keep everything pretty simple. And then once I can kind of figure out the simple portion of it, then I'll learn to expand it out. And it's like, all right, this is what's happening, and when I'm working with the athletes, I give them the simplified version because, and then I'll get into details of myself, or, if they're that curious, I'll get into the details of like, all right, this is what we're trying to do. This is, kind of what we're trying to get out of it. So let's say we're getting into that step back, or let's actually go into a vertical jump. We have to build up so much energy. We have to build up so much speed before we even take off into that jump. And so the more and more energy we build up as we're driving towards the rim, then that dunk's going to be a lot easier because we transfer that horizontal energy, that horizontal speed into a vertical force. So let's see. So that's kind of as far as the math and physics side, that's kind of how I viewed it. And then I think DBC helped me take it a step farther. And gave me a much, much better understanding of how all the joints in the body work. And, they have a unbelievable assessment process to determine like joint range of motions within their athletes. And, they use these joint ranges of motions. All that is based off of, research and literature that's out there that says, look, the range of motion, in your knee should be 120 degrees, or the range of motion in your shoulder during abduction should be, like 180 degrees or something like that, and all these different numbers. And so then applying that, taking the measurements on each person who comes into the facility. And then from there, it's like, all right, we have a low number. So, that range of motion is kind of limited. So how do we improve that? And that's where it kind of gets more into like kind of the actual anatomical side of it, working with the muscles. It's like, all right, so if that range of motion isn't there, then we need to stretch that muscle, the more that's controlling that joint. And in some cases, someone has too great a range of motion, they're hypermobile, then in that case, we are like, all right, we're not going to stretch this at all. We're not even going to touch it when it comes to any sort of mobility. However, what we will do is place an emphasis within the training program to strengthen that muscle, and just through strengthening it, or just through resistance training, we naturally tighten that muscle up. So that's where they kind of came into place and kind of took my understanding of things a lot farther. And they have a level 1 and a level 2 certification that goes over the mechanics of the human body, as well as teaching that assessment process. So that's kind of where I've been able to use that math and physics, is in those spaces. So.
Got you. And then kind of taking it back to the foundation of that, you mentioned like a lot of like the muscles and stuff like that in your body is like levers and pulleys and terminology like that. Can you define some of like the basic terminology that it would be important for athletes to maybe not like understand at a super deep level, but just to have a good idea of like roughly what it means?
So I guess in terms of the really understanding the difference. So there's actually a term that's been used a ton, I think, in the training realm, and people don't always understand the complexity to it, and that's a moment arm. So there's a lot of training books out there that says, oh, the moment arm is this many times greater, or the moment arm is this many times greater, and this is how it can be calculated. And in many, I can't say all situations, but a lot of those situations, that moment arm is the equation they give for, or the way of determining it is incorrect, or being able to define what a moment arm is incorrect. So one of the things is moments, and this is actually something I'm trying to really hammer away right now within my Instagram posts and whatnot. Is so if we can talk about moments, which a moment is kind of going to be that. Think of it as like doing a lateral raise. All right.
Yeah.
As you raise that arm up to the side here, that weight becomes heavier and tougher when you get to here. And as you put it down more, it becomes a little bit easier. And then when we get from here and start to go back up, it's not nearly as bad, especially if we're working on like a 10-pound weight. And that's because of that distance from that joint, which from a physics perspective, we'll use axis of rotation, your pivot point. But those two will kind of can be used interchangeably. So that axis of rotation is that shoulder joint. And then the moment is the distance from that axis of rotation to that weight. So if I have that 10-pound weight, and let's just say my arm's roughly 2 feet long, then that moment would be about 2 feet greater than what it would be down here at the side. And then the other thing we also got to keep in mind about is, when we're doing these movements, we also have to think about our line of actions. And this is where understanding force vectors, where those come in. So I know I'm getting super. I can.
You're good. This is great. This is one of the podcasts. The podcasts are great for diving deep into this stuff. So go for it.
Okay. All right. So, and then we get into some of those lines of actions. So if I'm here and if I'm holding this weight here, and then I bring it forward in front of me, and then I start to do kind of a punching motion. All right. This is where we have to understand our line of action. Now we get into that punching motion, and kind of more of like almost looks like a chest press. But if we have a weight in that hand, we have to think about our line of action. And so our line of action is whatever weight we have in that hand, we have to use that with, and if it's a dumbbell, it's going to be, with the direction of gravity. And so gravity is always pointing down, right?
Yeah.
So if we have gravity pointing down, all right, and we're holding it out here in front, we have to realize, all right, are we using more chest here, or are we using more shoulder? And that's where you got to, kind of take things back over to kind of the physiological side. All right, the shoulder, or, those delts are in charge of forward flexion. So, and if I'm right in this position, I'm in that forward flexion. Now I might be going in and out a lot, but the forces that are involved with going in and out don't even add up to where the forces that are involved when it's just holding that weight at a certain level the entire time. And if you were even just take like a 10-15 pound weight, and let's just say you're just throwing punches, your arms give out way before that chest does, right? More times than not, that those shoulders are giving out way before. So that's how we can understand. So we take those lines of actions, applying it to gravity, especially when we have dumbbells. We understand that everything when it comes to dumbbells and barbells, it's always the weight straight down, and what's opposing that weight straight down. So we have our gravity pointing down, but we have our arm, which is holding that weight going up. All right. So we have, kind of this, these forces counteracting each other to keep it that way at the same level. So if we have these two forces right here, they're, going opposite directions. So we have to think about, all right, we have got these forces. This is, and we're getting into free body diagrams at the simplest of levels. We have these two forces opposing each other's. Now we have to think about, all right, we have gravity and we know what's this force. It's gravity. But what's causing this force? What's causing this force that's keeping this weight up to oppose that gravity? And then that's when we take it back. It's like, all right, now we can get into the muscles. Now we can get into what's going to hold that there. And this entire time, and then, in that situation, we'd say, all right, we have the delt working there. And that's where we can make those connections. So that's kind of it in its simplest form in terms of connecting the math, the physics with the anatomy and what goes on with the body itself. Same thing when we talk about, squat or deadlift. Same things are going on. All right. So what's driving that movement? There's other muscles that are involved, and to create this motion when we're doing those punches, the chest is going to work a little bit. Yeah. But is it going to be the same amount of tension in that chest that we have in that shoulder, just kind of holding up the entire time? More than likely not. And that's where, the use of cables and bands, having those lines of action come into place and are important. And so that, when we get into being on all fours being on our legs, how do we get kind of that, functionality of working the chest, which is going to be in charge of more of like a horizontal movement? How do we get that involved when we're in an upright position, when we aren't, on our backs, or when we're doing a push-up?
Got it. And then why would you want to really focus on, like, why not just do a push-up, or why not just do a bench press?
And they have their place. But when we come to taking that athlete and getting them more and more prepared for that game, giving them a more realistic game situation, that's where those kind of things kind of come into place. That's where the neurological side, of the body comes into place, so that those movement patterns, it's like, all right, we've done it with weight, we've done it with resistance. Now when we get on the court and we're in this exact position, it's a much easier situation. So that's why we would probably, one that I've used in the past is using like a bilateral stance cable chest press. And so, or a split stance cable fly. So like with the split stance cable fly, I like this one in this situation is because as that guy's, going down the court and he sees a guy, probably 30, 40 feet ahead of him. He's taking that ball way back here to make that pass across the court while in motion. So, unless you practice that thing over and over and over on the court, it can be tough. It can be a tough play to make. But, we've added some resistance behind it. We spend 5-10 minutes at, beginning 2-3 times a week. That becomes a lot easier play to make. And then from that point, then it's just, all right, how accurate can you be with the ball? So that strength is there. Now let's just see, what you can do with the ball. So that would be a situation why we would want to do, these movements that can be traditionally done on our backs or, with our hands on the ground. Why would we want to do them more in a, I kind of a quote unquote functional way, or more game-like situation? So those would be our reasons.
Got you. And then kind of just hammering that point home even more, like, are there any other examples that stand out to you as far as like those kind of game-like situations and like an exercise or a couple of exercises that would translate over to that?
I
mean, obviously it's going to depend on the context of the program and the individual situation.
I'm going to try to keep it to just like right off the top of the head. I'm just kind of thinking basketball as far as that goes. But, this is, again, kind of, or like, when this is one thing I'll do with a guy. Actually, I love this one. So I'll do kind of, I call it wood chop, but it's lateral movement of the hips along with some rotation in the core. And
Okay.
so I'll use this, and I've got a few examples. I'd have to check exactly where it's at, but I've got a few examples on my phone and then also on my Instagram
Hmm.
where guy's got a cable, and as he's shifting his weight from left to right, he's bringing that cable across. And in that situation, what I have as far as a thought is guy having the ball here and swinging it across to make a drive.
Hmm.
And I love this one because it makes that first step so much quicker because they can move their hips a lot quicker. And then if they get those hips in sync with that core, it makes it look seamless. And so
Yeah.
defensive player is not going to be able to react quick enough to even make that sort of play. So this one is amazing. I love it. And what's great is the athletes see an impact on the court right away because they never get in this
Yeah.
position. They never get into a ball swing, utilizing the correct portions of their body with weight. So when they get into this situation, I throw this at them and then I progress it to where, all right, we don't just have a cable in our hands, but we have that cable with a ball. All right, that's a little bit more game situation. And then I'll take it even a step farther, and they have the cable in their hand with the ball, and I'll be right there, right in front of them, swiping at it, looking to take that ball away,
Got it.
so that
Yeah.
they're not just strong in those hips and that core, but they're strong in those hands. And when they're swinging that ball over, they're doing it with intensity and some authority.
Yeah.
So that's one that I really like to use when it comes to basketball guys and just understanding as opposed to a traditional let's do just some lateral band walks or let's just do some squats. This is where I'll as we get closer to the season, this kind of takes a higher priority over those squats. Kind of the
Yeah.
squats are more of at that point in the season more of a supplementary exercise, just something to add a little bit of general strength, or some of those band walks, just looking to add maybe some supplementary strength. But movements where we have that wood chop is kind of takes priority in that sort of situation. And that's
Got it.
honestly that's a movement that takes time. So I'll introduce that
Hmm.
right away just because I want the guys when it comes closer to the season, I want them to be perfect with it.
Yeah.
And honestly, there's probably easily 10 steps into the progression in terms of just making it nice and smooth. So,
Got it. Got it. And then kind of getting into the overall like program design aspect, obviously it's going to be super dependent on the individual, but are there any like commonalities between like the athletes or just kind of across the athletes that you work with as far as how you're going about building a program that works for them?
yeah. So, I'll break it up into about just depending on my timeline and
Yeah.
based on the athlete, somewhere between 3 to 5 phases. If
Okay.
I have a little bit more time, I'll probably extend it out to kind of like 5 phases. But being very general, starting off with kind of a corrective and overall strength aspect, and then getting into a little bit more some power strength after that. So being a little bit faster initially with
Hmm.
our movements and with a barbell going at that 70% intensity or 70% weight on the bar, or dumbbells, whatever the case may be, and
Yeah.
then getting more into more pure speed, dropping down that weight dramatically, and then after that getting probably taking it another phase into more of the game situation, making it very game like, and then usually if I know the guy's going to be starting preseason or
Yeah.
he's going back with his team, I usually spend about a week or two getting more into their specific type of conditioning. And conditioning changes so much from sport to sport. For a guy who does football, he's looking for I'm usually jumping between 3, 4, or 5 different exercises, and for each of those, he's hitting maybe 3 to 8 seconds on each one.
Yeah.
And then we get into a basketball guys and we start to lengthen that out where it's more of 10 to 25 seconds in between each exercise. And And then soccer is a lot longer duration.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, but with each one, and that's kind of the fun of it, is
for sure.
learning to adapt those phases to each athlete. But I would say, as far as program design, that's kind of what I'm looking at. And honestly, when I'm looking at every one of my athletes, probably one of the top things that I prioritize, or one of the things, if not the number one thing that I'm prioritizing in terms of strength, is unilateral strength. Because very rarely, as we look at athletes across the board, especially our traditional athletes with football, soccer, baseball, basketball.
Yeah,
They're all very unilateral. It's all about sprinting. It's all about stopping on one leg. It's all about jumping off one leg. It's all about just kind of rotation, one direction. And so those are things that I'm kind of putting in terms when it comes to developing those programs, putting those programs together. That's one of the things that sit at the highest as far as wanting to develop on my list.
Got it. And on that conditioning aspect that you mentioned, I know for a lot of people listening, it'll be pretty like clear why football will be like 3 to 8 seconds, basketball a little bit longer, soccer a little bit longer, but maybe some people don't really know. Can you explain a little bit like why that would be? Like why would you change those time frames and like the approach there depending on those differences in the sport?
Yeah. So I mean, let's look at this at the game itself. When we look at football plays, we don't have many of them lasting more than 10 seconds. Now, that's not to say a play won't last 20 or 30 seconds. And, that's why I'll go a little bit beyond.
For sure.
Not only that, but, just so that they're good for those 10 seconds. So 10 seconds. And then as far as their rest in betweens, 20 to 40 seconds. Because that's, and especially if we get into a no huddle situation, that's going to be that's exactly what the game is going to be like when it comes to as far as for that athlete being ready. And then when we get into a game of basketball where, plays, you can go back and down the court a couple times. And that's looking probably somewhere between 30 seconds to a minute to maybe even a minute and a half straight before you can kind of just stand. All right, plays developing, or, however the case may be. All right. And so in that situation, I have maybe a minute to a minute and a half total of exercises, hitting multiple different body parts, hitting, kind of different positions, because the game changes so quickly. We're not just doing one thing the entire time during those plays. And that's why, I have multiple exercises when it comes to the conditioning aspect, is so that we're hitting a little bit of everything, making sure we're hitting all sorts of situations. And so that
got it. What would that look like in application, like for basketball, since most players listening right now are probably playing basketball, focusing mostly on that? Like what would one of those circuits look like with those different exercises in the
Okay. So one kind of circuit we could do here is doing lateral hurdles, just keeping it very simple, lateral hurdles. And then so that we're also working on not just lateral movement, but also change of direction, going back and forth. We hit that, let's just say, for 15, 20 seconds. And then straight from there, we're going into some sort of, usually what I'm going to do, I'm going to include some sort of upper body movement, but I'm also going to make it to where the lower body also has to be either involved or stable. And so that's where we might get into a situation of wood chops. And again, another 15, maybe 20, 30 seconds, since we have to hit both sides. And then straight from there, getting into some vertical jumps, box jumps. And again, another, 15, 20 seconds. So after all that, we've hit at least 45 seconds, if not minute to a minute and a half of one exercise right after the other. And I'm, as we progress initially, it's going to be a lot tougher, but, by the end of those 2 weeks, those guys are going to do pretty darn well. And on top of that, be ready when it comes to getting ready for their teams, and be ready for that. And then that from there, their teams do a pretty solid jobs in terms of, extending that out, learning how to, condition them even better for the game. And that's why the preseason is there.
Got it. Got it. And then, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then looking at a lot of guys in the current situation, like once the whole COVID thing kind of eases up a little bit, they're getting back in the gym, whenever that may be, hopefully relatively soon, but whenever that may be. How would you recommend going about that process to minimize the risk of injury? Because, like, as we know, when you experience a very sharp increase in volume, injury risk will likely go up. So how do you kind of get around that and make sure to go about it in a smart way? Because I know everyone's like itching to get back in the gym. They don't want to spend hours and hours and hours in the gym when it opens up. How do you kind of balance that between getting to work in, but also being careful not to overshoot it right off the bat?
Yeah. Especially the first week or two, I'd say hold yourself back. Especially if you're a guy who, if when you get on the court, you're itching to get out there, and I get it. I totally get it. I've done it tons of times, and that's something that's one of those hard lessons I learned over the years. It's like, all right,
Absolutely.
hour and a half in, I want to go 3 hours of playing hoops, but you know what?
I don't think I ever learned that
in like 2 days. So like I want to be back on the court, at least getting some shots up in 2 days. So I'm gonna call this one. So holding yourself, if, like I said, if you're one to really push yourself, kind of hold yourself back to where you don't, work out to the point of complete exhaustion. So honestly, put yourself, limit your time, limit your minutes. And then the other thing is, I tell every athlete that I've worked with, look, you've got to match your training with your recovery. You've got to match, what you put in the gym with the amount of time you spent taking care of your body, at the very least, if not more. So that means stretching, doing mobility work, getting the proper rest, eating properly, because those are all things that are playing a factor in terms of you looking, feeling good the next day and the week after. So when I tell guys, like, all right, especially if I'm not working with them one-on-one, or I'm just, I'll occasionally get some DMs just asking, like, hey, what should I be doing, during this time? And I hate giving general advice, especially when it comes to stretching, just because, as I mentioned earlier, there's people who are hypermobile, and so they shouldn't be as gung-ho in terms of stretching certain muscles. But I always kind of, when it comes to, hit all your stretches, especially as basketball players, make sure you're stretching those quads out. I haven't met a basketball player yet who hasn't had tight quads.
I still have tight quads. I haven't played basketball. Well, I haven't played competitively in I think 2 years at this point. I still have tight quads.
Yeah. And that's not, that's not unnatural in the least bit. So in general population, for sure. I think so. I've assessed probably somewhere between 300 to 400 people, and I think I've met maybe 2 or 3 people who didn't have tight. So if that tells you anything,
gotcha. Are there any other things like that stand out to you, as far as like you've assessed so many people over the course of your career? Are there any other like trends that you see that usually apply?
So I would say there's like, if we look at the full spectrum of people, general population, football, basketball, all sorts of athletes, honestly, no. Everyone is very different. Now, when we get into maybe sports specific, there's some tendencies, but even then, honestly, they're I wouldn't say they're so. It's like, oh my gosh, he's a football player. He's definitely going to be tight in this area, or in these 4 or 5 different areas as well. It kind of goes with the nature of their position. Quarterbacks, are probably going to be a little bit tighter in those shoulders, just naturally throwing that ball, especially on that right side, as opposed to a lineman or a running back who's going to be definitely going to be a little bit tighter in those legs, hamstrings, glutes, calves, quads. And then, looking at basketball, like I said, I don't think I've met a basketball player yet who didn't have tight quads. And then
Do you
also,
see any differences between like right-handed players, left-handed players, what hand they shoot with most consistently, like in terms of like their shoulders, or anything like that?
shoulders,
Not
not
really.
so much. One thing that kind of has stood out to me when it comes to lefties and righties
Yeah.
is which hip is tighter. Especially,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So as we'll kind of, a lot of people point out, oh, the person shoots like this because this is the most optimal position to be in when it comes to shooting. Well, no, that's not necessarily true. Usually, these players are shooting in a specific way
I
to.
lost you there on the mic.
What's that?
Oh, 1 second. For some reason, my headphones disconnected. Let me hook those
Okay.
back up again. 1 sec. Not sure what happened there. So weird. Don't think they're dead. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
All right,
Can
I
you
think we
see
should be
me?
good to go.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good now. You're good.
Okay.
That was
Yeah.
my head disconnected for some reason.
Okay. But anyways, as far as quote unquote optimally shooting, it's not necessarily from a power. We have to look at the whole body as a full. So when I'm looking at these basketball players
Yeah.
specifically, and they're shooting, oftentimes they'll internally rotate on their shooting hip. So if we have a basketball player, if we have a right-handed shooter, usually as we look at that right hip, it'll be
Okay.
internally rotated towards that middle. And especially over and over and over, they do this. I mean, let's be honest, these guys put up anywhere from 2 to 1,000 shots a day. And when you do something that many times, just naturally going to be a lot tighter. So
Yeah.
for right-handed, I would, like I said, it's not always 100% the case, but it is a trend that I do see that right hip is tighter. Those internal rotators on that right hip is tighter. And then for lefties, same thing, just flip the sides. So that usually that left hip is a little bit tighter. And you'll see it especially, and it makes sense because as you see these guys shoot, they turn their hips, and they do this so they can line up that shooting arm.
Yeah.
It makes it a lot easier. If you get your hip out of the way, get your whole lower body out of the way, that arm is going to be a lot easier to line up with that back, the bucket.
Got it. And does that affect anything negatively as far as like power, like range, or is that just kind of a thing that happens and it's fine?
This is where like no one specific
For sure. Yeah.
muscle is going to like make or break you.
Yeah.
But this is where if you have that tight muscle, if if it's tight and you're not able to, if that internal rotator is so freaking tight, and you're not going to be able to external rotate nearly as easily as you do on the left side. So when it comes to performing any sort of movements, when it comes to external rotation, you're going to compensate. And so and this is when we talk about like we'll hear, oh, it's not an issue at the knee, it's actually an issue at the hip. That's kind of where that train of thought comes into place, is because a certain muscle is tight or because a certain muscle is weak, not functioning the way that we need it to function. That's where compensation is going to occur. And so whether it be if that guy can't really externally rotate because his internal rotator is so tight and he's trying to do a bilateral squat, well, maybe that internal rotator is so tight that it's causing that knee to cave in. So the issue isn't necessarily his abductors are weak. The issue, we can always strengthen those abductors, but we also have to worry about that internal rotator on that one leg so that his knee doesn't cave in nearly as much. So that's where some of those issues can come into place. And then this done over and over and over and over. And I do mean, like, you're very seldom are you going to see, oh, your, a muscle's tight, injury right away. It's going to be, a result of it done hundreds, if not thousands of times. And so at some point or another, something's going to give, whether it be some sort of tear around that knee, meniscus, PCL, ACL, whatever the case may be. And I'm just giving examples just because this is, these are common injuries that we do see.
For sure.
Another injury or another thing that I see as far as basketball players go, is definitely having super tight calves. The mobility in their ankle is just awful. And this is, I see a pretty decent correlation with lack of mobility in ankles and rolled ankles. So because that ankle isn't able to roll, isn't able to kind of maneuver the way we need it to, when they get into a position that forces them into that position, well, their body isn't able to adjust accordingly, and so it goes straight into a rolled ankle. So that's where we get that inflammation, get that pain, and honestly, we're out for whether it be a couple of days or honestly, let's be honest, some of these ankle injuries can last 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, even linger the rest of your career if you don't recover properly. So I know, like once player, like from players I talked to, obviously I'm not sure about like the exact statistics behind this, but a lot of guys would be like, yeah, you roll your ankle once and it's like it's over. Like it just keeps rolling again and again and again.
Yeah, because once we roll it once, then our body's like, oh snap, we can't ever be in that position ever again. Yeah. So we need to tighten up, and then the ankle tightens up even more, and then we're even more prone to rolling that ankle again, even when the inflammation's gone down. And so again, this is where you've got to match what you're doing on the court, what you're doing in the weight room, with how you're taking care of your body off the court. For high school, college players, stretch those calves out. Work on inversion, eversion of that ankle. Dorsey and both sort of the flexions with that ankle. So that's where I see a lot of connection in terms of injuries occurring with players. Again, it just kind of goes back to no one part of your program is the end all be all. You gotta take care of it. You gotta be in the weight room. You've got to be on the court. You've got to take care of yourself with stretching you've You've got to eat right. Eat, and obviously you can attest to this really a lot more than what I can.
Absolutely.
That, if you're not eating right, then the possibility of inflammation when you do get an injury is going to be even greater. And it's going to be a lot harder to come back because your body doesn't have the tools equipped to fight off that inflammation or to overcome that inflammation. And then again, sleeping, getting enough sleep at night.
Sleep is that one thing. I wish more players understood. It's just like if there was a pill that did everything that sleep did for you, like everyone would take it. It's like it's amazing. But people just love to ignore sleep, and it's like I'm just stay up and watch Netflix or play video games. Like, there's a time and but it's just like, man, if they just understood how important sleep was, it'd be so much different.
Oh, and like across the line, we're all bad about it. Like I get bad about it. I'm like, I get up usually right around 5 a.m. and I'm done with my day right around 8 p.m. and then I want an hour or two to myself and with my wife, and then then it's 10 or 11 and I'm like, great, 6 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Come. So and that's just it's all about priorities, where you want to put them, and I take off a little bit more time from work. I've been trying to be better about that, especially with COVID, just taking a little bit more time for myself and with my wife, and taking less spending less time at work. I just realized that, like, look, this is not something I'm going to complete in a week, or whatever I'm working on. I'm not going to complete it in a week. I'm not going to complete it in even a month. I just got to realize this is constant, something I got to constantly do. Just being consistent, honestly.
Yeah.
That's all it is just being consistent with it.
Yeah, nearly everything, nutrition, training, mindset, it all comes down to consistency. I mean, everyone wants, like we were talking about before we started recording, everyone wants to find the fancy diet or the fanciest training program or the fanciest whatever as like the solution. But it's the simple stuff that works.
It really is. And like, I've gone, so just even a little bit more background on me. When I was in college, so I had surgery on both my calves at the same time. I had chronic compartment syndrome. Not very common. But basically, what was going on was like the fascia around my calves wasn't wasn't allowing the kind of the expansion or the
Yeah.
swelling of my calves when I'd work out or when I'd run or whatever. And this dates back to even high school.
Okay.
I remember like running cross country races, and 100 meters into the race, I don't feel my feet. Like they just go numb, completely numb. And I was like, oh well.
I don't think that's normal.
So, and it got to the point where like I remember playing a half of basketball and in club and college, and
Yeah.
I literally felt like my calves were like a balloon about ready to like burst. It was like the freakiest thing ever.
Yeah. So
Yeah, but because of that injury and all that, like I weighed like 215, 220. I was about
oh
40
wow.
pounds overweight than what I'd ever
Yeah.
been. I weighed like 180 in high school. And
Mm-hmm.
then I always tell people like, I didn't gain the freshman 15. I gained the sophomore 25 or 30 or 40, however you want to put it.
Yeah.
But from that moment forward, like, once I was back on my feet, I was able to run again. I was just like, I gotta pick my shit back up because this is terrible. And so, just little by little over the last, 6-7 years, I've dropped more and more weight. And, over the last 2 years, I had a buddy of mine who is really into nutrition and does some nutrition coaching. And I was like, you know what, at this point, I need some help. So, I kind of, I hired him as a coach, and he kind of talked to me about some stuff. And, I worked with him for a few months, and he really helped me even take, my diet to where it was then and take it even farther. And honestly, and the biggest thing he did was help me have a healthy relationship with food. And that was huge. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Because there's some days where it's like, oh, I need carbs, and then other days where like scared shitless of carbs. And, but learning, it's like, all right, like this is really what it's going on in your body. And I had total appreciation for it because having the background in chemistry, I love how that shit works in the body.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It's so interesting.
It's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a huge science and math nerd. So you talk deep science the shit on me, man. I'm with you all day. Let's talk.
I love it. I think one thing to dive into there is what causes fatigue? Because people get really confused about that. Obviously, there's multiple facets to it, but like in terms of the whole lactic acid and fatigue thing, like what's actually going on there on a molecular level?
As far as that side of things go, I'll explain it simply just because I don't think I understand it nearly as well as what other people do. But what I will say is, that main source of fuel for our bodies is those carbohydrates, and we need those carbohydrates to fuel the body. Turn those carbohydrates into glucose to use for the body. And correct me if I'm wrong at any point, because like I said, this
you're good.
Stuff I haven't really dove too much into it for like it's been about 5 years since I really like dove deep into
Got you.
But and then some of those things that happen, our body's looking for another source of fuel and something that burns fairly quickly because we've gone through our muscle glycogen storage, and so when we're looking for another source and we don't have something that burns nearly as quickly as carbs, so it's usually going to go to if I remember correctly, going to go to proteins, and fat's going to kind of be like that last source unless we get into kind of that more lower intensity type of workout setting. And this is again, this is where having the proper nutrition can put ourselves in the right position to use those fuels accordingly. And then in terms of kind of that lactic acid buildup, this is one where like I like getting into a little bit, especially when it comes to weightlifting, because one of the supplements that I really love using, and I personally notice a difference, is using beta alanine. And what that does, and this is something that was really cool because this was something we learned in chemistry, and we actually did like lab projects on this. So that beta alanine, so you have all of these hydrogen atoms and around the muscle. And so what a beta alanine kind of does from a very simple perspective, kind of creates a buffer. And for anybody who's like a chemistry nerd, it's like when we were do like liquid titration, and you're trying to get some sort of reaction, you're getting some sort of color change.
Flashbacks to OChem lab.
Yeah, right. Oh man, loved OChem.
I'll have to disagree with you on that.
Like I said, man, anything. The only thing, I'm trying to think. The only thing
there was a problem set in that class that literally everyone was up until like 2 a.m. the night before, just trying to figure out what the hell was going on. And I was like, all right, this is a little much, but it is interesting though. Actually, I did enjoy it. Really good professor. It's just super hard.
Yeah, it is. It is very tough. I remember like, and this is where like people would, complain about their chemistry, physics exams, math exams. I was like, you haven't taken a chemical engineering exam. Like this stuff you go into, you're like, I studied all week, 20, 30 hours plus.
Like 60% an A.
And you go in, you look at this test, and you're like, I don't think we learned anything of this stuff this semester. I don't even learned it. And so class average is usually around 30, 40%. You're just like, I got failing. I get great.
That's
but
funny.
I will say the one thing that really helped me with was, I'm already someone who puts as much time as I can to really understanding things. And I'll let someone know, it's like, hey, I don't know this to the best of my abilities. Like, this is not necessarily my.
Yeah, it's huge. There's a lot, too many people, especially now, that try to act like they're experts on something they're not. Like, there's some things in nutrition. I'm like, I haven't done enough research into that yet. Like, look into that. Get back to you.
Yeah, and so with that saying, like, with that saying, I do have a lot of confidence in what I do say, and what I do know. And what I don't know, I said, like, look, this is the route I'll go. Like, start correcting me if I'm wrong. But I think doing that, I literally made a tweet about this the other day. Like, whoever you're with, whether it's athletes, whether it's just a general population client, or whether it's just a colleague within your industry, be real. Just be straight up and say, you know what, I don't understand this as well. Or I feel like, this is an area I can learn more on. So, if you can just be straight up with, with yourself and with others in terms of what you don't know, where your expertise lies, then I think there's just a lot of respect that, will be given back in those situations. So
for sure. No, I couldn't agree more. And definitely in the industry and field that we're in, you see it quite a bit. And it's like, if more people understood it, it would save a lot of athletes a lot of trouble. Cause just for the sake of,
honestly, because and this is no fault to them, because they've got a hectic workload when it comes to, like, you have to think about, like, everything that they have to understand. Not only do they have to put, like, their body through such, like, brutal, intense workouts, but they need to understand plays. They need to understand, like, the game of basketball, how the inner workings of that, have that kind of that basketball IQ when it comes to, all right. This is something, I'll work with some younger kids in terms of, like, some skill sessions. Like I said, it's not my forte. My forte is more on the lifting aspect. But at the younger age, I do feel comfortable with them. And this is something I tell them. I said, look, when you're matched up with a dude and you're going one-on-one, like, keep these things in mind. And I think, like, look at their hips, look at their feet. All right, how are they positioned? All right, and this is where you can kind of take advantage of a defender who doesn't understand some of those things. So they have to understand those things, and then on top of that, they have to understand weightlifting to a perspective. They have to understand their own nutrition to a degree, and then other things that are going on in their lives in terms of stress and whatnot, stress factors. So
that's stress. Stress is a whole other podcast episode in and of itself. We could dive into that. It's like people don't realize, and that was a realization that I had in terms of, like, my coaching. Like we're talking about, I think before we went on air as well. Like, when I first started, it was all about, I want to show I'm the smartest person in the room. I want to show that I know all this physiology stuff. I know all the the metabolism pathways and all this stuff, and like they don't care. They
No.
need to know a little bit. Like they need to understand. Okay, high intensity, use carbohydrates. Low intensity, maybe a little bit more fat. But like
Yeah.
understand the basic stuff like that. But they don't need
Yeah.
to understand to the step of glycolysis where all this stuff comes into play. It's more about just making it simple and easy to implement, and that was a huge thing.
Yeah.
For me, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And then learning how to put that into words for every person. That's where, that's where the kind of the art of coaching comes into place, is really understanding, all right, I'm to a certain level or degree in terms of my intellect, but if a guy came and reached 10% of that, I'm nothing. That I can, if I don't understand it well enough to break it down to someone who's 8, then I don't understand it nearly well enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, kind of going back to our earlier point, there are a lot of egos in the industry, and not to say that these guys who do have these egos know nothing, but there are many out there who just really throw up a lot of confidence and whatnot in their words, but don't always have that intellect to back it. And that's where, for these basketball players, you can put them into positions that are really disadvantageous, and they don't really understand kind of the inner workings of their diet, having the proper mechanics so that they're not putting too many forces or too much emphasis in terms on their quads, and understanding how to utilize their hamstrings when it comes to lunging, utilize their glutes when it comes to lunging. Not only will that help them, from a performance perspective, but also stay healthy perspective. These guys who, just breathe confidence everywhere they go, and don't have the understanding. I mean, that can be extremely dangerous to any athlete who works with them.
For sure. And I know we're coming up on the hour here. Definitely want to respect your time. It looks like we have a couple of questions in the comments. If you want, we can dive into those. Are you cool with that?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that.
Awesome. One question coming from Matthews asking, should basketball players train a short ground contact time or long ground contact time to produce force for their vertical jump?
So I guess, and this is where, and it just depends on the program, but and I'll go into kind of purposes for each one. As far as a longer ground contact time, or let's go into this first. Let's go into why would we do a short ground contact time versus a longer ground contact time. So with a longer ground contact time, usually as long as we're constantly moving during that contact with the ground, we're going to be able to produce more force in that time. And so, like, one thing that I'll do with guys is I'll do a seated box jump, where their feet are on the ground and they're just focusing on building up force. All right, in a fairly normal jump position, whether it be with kind of sit with their legs or their thighs at a 90-degree angle, or maybe a little bit higher up. So they're learning. So that's where kind of a longer ground contact time would take place, is initially building up more force. Now, when we get into more of a shorter ground contact time, that's when we're learning to transfer energy, learning to go from, maybe jumping down into a jump right back up, or we're learning to, run towards the hoop at full sprint and going into that, into that jump, into that, that dunk. So when we are trying to do those certain things, we want a really high carryover of the energy that we already have from, just dropping all of that energy, that kinetic energy that we have coming down towards the ground, or, moving across the ground. And we want to convert as much of that energy into that vertical power, into that, vertical height. So this is where short ground contact time is important. So if I were programming this out, like initially, if I'm, just say start from scratch, and I want to improve vertical jump, I'm going to do probably I'm going to do longer ground contact times in the beginning to initially build up that strength, build up that power. So I have a basis, a foundation to kind of go off of. And then over time, over the course of 6 to 12 weeks, I'll look to reduce that ground contact time so that I can get the person kind of get a little bit more carryover in terms of, applying it maybe in a game situation or just, for their own fun.
Got it. Awesome. And then we'll dive into one more question here and then wrap it up. This other question is asking, is there anything I should be doing on my rest days that can help me improve muscle growth?
Oh man, I should defer this to you. Eat.
Yeah, that actually is really important. So a lot of guys, or a lot of times guys will ask, should I lower my calories on rest days? And a lot of the times the answer is no.
No.
I mean, the process of refueling occurs on that rest day. So if you, because in theory, it makes sense. Oh, I'm burning less calories. I need less calories.
Right.
Lower it. But you got to refuel for that next day. So if you rest Sunday and you're training Monday, but you eat less on Sunday, that's going to carry over into your Monday training session, and you're not going to be fueled properly for that. Because people think like their pre-workout meal is fueling their training. A lot of the times, that's not true. There was a study fairly recently, I think, that looked at comparing pre-workout meals, like a full, I forget what the serving size was of carbohydrates, but compared with the placebo, it had a much smaller amount of carbohydrates, and they both achieved like the same result in the training, like as far as strength and stuff like that. So that direct pre-workout meal, it's important. So you should have something, but it's not like the make or break. A lot of times it's that day prior of fueling and just in general eating enough food. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. So on rest days, eat enough. Don't go crazy with it, but just eat the same amount you normally do. Very rarely will I adjust downwards on a rest day unless there's some sort of data in my like one-on-one work that would suggest we need to do that. But usually just keep calories the same.
Yeah, and this is stressed a ton with with runners. Like they're the day before a race, carbo load.
I work with a couple of triathletes, and the amount of training they do is absurd. And it's like, you got to eat lots. Lots of carbs.
Well, we can do one more question if you want.
Cool. Yeah, let's dive into one more. Another question from Matthew's asking, how do basketball players build and train elasticity?
This is a terminology that is just thrown around a lot without people really understanding what that means. And so let me just get to it from
what does it mean? Because I don't even think I'm 100% sure on what it means.
All right, so let's look at this. Let's break it down. Very, very simple. All right, elasticity and the ability to kind of go back to a shape that we originally started off with. All right, so easiest like example for this is a rubber band. All right. The elasticity of a rubber band. So if we stretch that out, all right, what's the power, what's the force that's going to be involved to get that back to its original position? And then at the same time, there can be even greater force, too much force for that rubber band to where it doesn't go back to that exact same size. It doesn't go back to that exact same shape. And so we're kind of in this, balance between how much force should we have? How much is too little? How much is too much? What's kind of that sweet spot? And this is something, honestly, this is a project that I'm kind of working on over the next year or two, just to with some athletes via online, just to kind of demonstrate some points. But like, I honestly hate the phrase train elasticity. Like, to me, that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard, because it's just used incorrectly. All right. So, and then when we look at like tendons and ligaments, there's studies out there that talk about like the hypertrophy of tendons and ligaments. And these studies are used when people start talking about like, doing this and this and this, gave us a hypertrophic event with the tendons and ligaments. Well, if you actually look at what that means, like hypertrophy of tendons and ligaments and hypertrophy of muscles are separate things. So hypertrophy of tendons and ligaments is usually damage that is I don't want to say irreversible, but to a degree, you get to a point where if the small tears that happen within tendon and ligaments don't repair nearly as well as what muscles do. We make micro tears in our muscles and they recover. And that's, we're trying to get that effect. But you have that hypertrophic event with tendons and ligaments, then you have things like scar tissue kind of taking place of those small tears, and scar tissue is not as strong as the original cells that were there. So again, this is where if we're going to talk about really trying to train, I'm assuming this elasticity has to go with like training vertical jump and just speed overall. Focus on moving. First of all, build your strength foundation to learn how to move a certain weight, usually right around 50 to 70%. Move it at a very, pretty quick speed. All right. And then drop that weight down to about 10 to 30% and move that super fast. And then at the same time, learn to do, explosive stuff, sprint, 40-yard sprints, doing vertical jumps to a certain height, not just box jump. Box jumps have a good place, but go for a spot where you're actually, gaining height on your vertical and not just trying to reach into a box. Those are things that I would say focus more on, and kind of the things I mentioned earlier in terms of you're going to have longer ground contact time initially in those strength phases and strength power phases, and then you're going to have focus on shorter ground contact times when we get more and more into the explosive, a lot less weight, and looking at much greater speed. Because when we're talking about having a lot of power and, quote unquote, generating power, it's about taking the energy that we've built up and learning to convert that into, another direction, from horizontal to upwards, to from downwards to upwards, all those different things. So that's what I would say for that.
Got it. Awesome. And then there's another question about sleep. For the person who asked the question about sleep, I have 2 videos on the channel right now on sleep. So I would definitely watch those. And if you implement what we talk about in those 2 videos, you should be in a really, really good spot. But yeah, sleep is definitely crazy important. So I would definitely watch those if I were you. Now, Connor, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate taking over an hour of your day to chat with me and help some of these players out that are watching. I know that, like I said, I learned a ton. So I know everyone else did. So I appreciate your time. Where can everyone keep up with what you're doing and follow along with what you have going on?
Yeah. So I have 2 platforms that I'm most active right now on, and that's Instagram and Twitter. You can find me at Connor_Barber_. And then, I've got everything in between Facebook. I'm on YouTube. I'm looking to working on getting some bigger videos with that over the next few months. Awesome. And then I'm on TikTok as well, man. So you can find me about
Love everything. It.
So
how's that going for you? That one, it hasn't taken off for me. I've been trying, but it's just I haven't gotten that video that's gone viral yet.
Yeah, for me, that hasn't taken off as much. I guess my thought process behind it is, look, I'm trying to reach out to middle school and high schoolers who eventually will be high school and college players, and those college players will be, pros. So, this is something that's, starting off with a young crowd, but it's going to get more, I think, as time goes on, it's going to get more and more popular with an older crowd as well. And so, having a good base of content in those areas, it's kind of my thought process in terms of kind of building that up.
Love it. Well, I appreciate taking the time to come on, and really enjoyed the conversation, and excited for everyone to hear it.
Yeah. Hey, and thanks for having me on. Such a blessing to, be on and kind of talk and, just have people listen to me. This is just something that, I've watched tons of people in the past talk about their viewpoints and whatnot in training, and to be asked to talk about my viewpoints is definitely a humbling experience.
Of course, man. Happy to have you on.
All right, take it easy, Tommy.